Hi everyone, welcome to Doing Sociology. We are here today with Dr. Karthick Ram Manoharan, who is a faculty at National Law School of India University. He was Marie Curie Research Fellow at the University of Wolverhampton, where his European Union funded project explored the political thought of Periyar EV Ramasamy. He's the author of Periyar, a study in political atheism. And today we'll be talking to him about his book, which was published by Orient Blackswan in 2022. And a list of his publications, in addition to more material on Periyar, can be found at theperiyarproject.com. So welcome, Karthik. Very happy to have you with us today. And to begin our conversation, could you just tell us about the genesis of the book?
Okay, so the genesis of the book is from a journal article called Freedom from God, Periyar and Religion, which I had written for this journal called Religions in 2019. Around the same time, I had also presented a paper on the same theme called Gods in, on Periyar and Religion at this international conference called Gods in the Public Sphere, organized by Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Kolkata, where I was a faculty, and the University of Oslo. This was sometime in December 2019, I believe. So, as around the time when this paper came out, and around the time when I made this presentation, I was having a lot of conversation with colleagues of mine, and they were actually asking me to expand on this paper and publish it as a monograph, since there is so much of primary material available on Periyar, but very few works which have actually engaged with this vast primary material that are out there in the academia. Specifically, I want to highlight over here that there are around 37 volumes of the collected works of Periyar published by the Dravida Kazhagam under the name of the Periyar Self-Respect Propaganda Institution, right? Now, what is significant is that most of these 37 volumes were published only after 2000. And for a long time, from the time of Periyar's demise onwards till well into 2015 or so, the primary material used by scholars who were interested in Periyar or Dravidian politics was a 3-volume selection of Periyar's works, which was published sometime in the late 1970s, and this was assumed to be the complete works of Periyar. But now we have 37 volumes in hand, and even these are not the complete works of Periyar. These are only the collected works of Periyar. So there was really a lot of material out there, and very few people who were actually accessing and using this material. So this was almost like a gold mine for me, both as an academic and also as someone interested in Dravidian politics, mainly because as regards Periyar, I would say that much of the opinions which have been circulating around him in academia, whether by the best of his supporters or by the worst of his critics, I believe presented only a partial and sometimes a very reductive image of Periyar, right? So I felt that in the light of the availability of this vast material and the sort of general interest in new knowledge on Periyar and Dravidian politics, I should make this intervention. And there is also one other very larger factor which I believe led to the production of this book, which is the changing political dynamics in India and in Tamil Nadu. Now, as you would know, in 2014, the BJP government came with a thumping majority. But however, they were unable to make any inroads in Tamil Nadu, where the ADMK under Jayalalitha made a clean sweep, right? Again in 2019, the BJP again came to power with a huge majority, but this time they were defeated in Tamil Nadu by the DMK-led Secular Progressive Alliance under the leadership of MK Stalin. So there was something, I mean, I don't want to call this a Tamil Nadu exceptionalism, but there was definitely something unique about the politics of Tamil Nadu, which prevented the entry of a Hindu nationalist organization like the BJP. And there are many commentators who do, and quite rightly, credit it to the strong presence of Dravidian politics. Therefore, I wanted to interrogate the thoughts of a core thinker, in fact, the key thinker of Dravidian politics, and explore not just the significance which he has for Tamil Nadu or India, but for global conversations on secularism, religion, and social justice.
Right. So this brings us to our next question, which is what is political atheism that you write about? If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, okay. See, in political theory, there is a concept called political theology, which was very powerfully elucidated by this German political philosopher called Carl Schmitt. And to him, political theology is the understanding of secularized theological concepts, namely how the state uses language, or the politics of the modern state uses language that has an uncanny similarity to religion. What political atheism seeks to do is to pose a challenge to political theology. And when it poses this challenge to political theology, it necessarily criticizes both religion and the state. Now, what makes political atheism from other forms of atheism is that general atheism or discourses around atheism confront theology or certain aspects of theology, let's say creationism, okay, or let's say the question of theodicy, or let's say the superstitious or the irrational or mystical aspects of religion. So these have generally been the usual attacks of atheism when it comes to theology. But what makes political atheism significant is that it usually has a very strong and often an emancipatory agenda in its criticism of religion. So it is not just a criticism of religion for the sake of criticism. It's usually done with some broader social or political purpose in mind. The second thing is that it does not stop with the criticism of religion, but extends it to a criticism of nationalism and the nation state, and tries to see how these concepts are interlinked, how religion, nationalism, nation state, and the state, and how the narratives of these often intertwine to produce and reproduce social hierarchies and inegalitarian societies. So political atheism is a sort of a critical agenda that challenges political theology, which criticizes religion and religious forms of mystifications, as well as the state and statist form of mystifications, and instead asserts the sovereignty of the individual, often taking for granted that the individual is a rational thinking subject who has the capacity for self-determination.
Right. So, how do you think Periyar's political atheism is similar or different from the Marxist or the anarchist approaches?
Okay, so now I have gone very briefly into this in my book, but a sort of a broader interaction of Periyarism, Marxism, and anarchism would, I believe, deserve a book on its own. But what I can say is that let me just first go through Periyar's own life and his own political conversations, right? To the best of my knowledge and reading from whatever available material of Periyar is there, I don't think Periyar has engaged with any anarchist thinker directly. That is what I mean by anarchist thinker, as in any thinker who voluntarily self-identifies as an anarchist, right? So in India, also at the time, anarchism was not a very popular concept, though there were a few figures who could be loosely called anarchist. Bhagat Singh, for instance, though he openly claimed or declared himself to be a communist, some of his strategies and some of the people he refers to, I think, in talking about the politics of throwing the bomb, he makes reference to a French anarchist, right? So some of the actions and inclinations of Bhagat Singh might be loosely called anarchist, and Periyar does translate Bhagat Singh's "Why I Am an Atheist" into Tamil, right? But then Periyar's engagement with Bhagat Singh at that time was strongly mediated by the general understanding that Bhagat Singh was a Marxist socialist, right? Likewise, Periyar's lieutenant, S. Ramanathan, was also a Marxist with reportedly Trotskyist sympathies. Periyar also extensively interacted with the leaders of the Communist Party in Tamil Nadu, and again, they were Marxists and they had no anarchist inclinations. Periyar's trip to the Soviet Union, which I have discussed a bit in my book, was also a very remarkable affair because he meets over there with several atheist unions and he looks up to the Soviet model, both for its what he believed for creating a more egalitarian society and economy, but more importantly, for the freedom which women enjoyed in the Soviet Union. So often he makes reference to the Soviet Union as a positive model, especially for the emancipation of women and not just for the abolition of class differences. So in his works, it appears that Periyar was more impressed by the Soviet socialist model. So why do I make this claim that he is a lot closer to anarchism? Because I argue that much like anarchism, Periyar's focus was not so much on economy, but on power, right? So anarchism is firstly and foremostly a critique of power, all forms of power, right? And where Marxists believe that state power can be captured and productively used, anarchists strongly reject that, and they believe that it is not just the economy that has to be challenged, but equally, perhaps more importantly, state power, because state power will always lead to the production of an elite who will claim to rule on behalf of the masses and will inevitably rule over the masses, curtailing their liberties. This is the very basic anarchist critique of state power. When you look at Periyar, he does not, theoretically elaborate on this. I also mentioned in the book that he is not a theorist or a philosopher who systematically expounds a concept. But having said that, there are many moments in Periyar's speeches and writings where he is sharply positioning a critique of all forms of power, be it religious power or state power or economic power or social power or, in more familial terms, patriarchal power, and the different forms of powers and hierarchies which exist in society. So I believe that in essence, rather than in actions or in the positions which Periyar himself took, Periyarism is a lot closer to anarchism.
Right. Thank you for that response. So, if you could also talk about the context of Tamil Nadu, because you describe in the book a place with several temples, and yet there is a contradictory figure in the name of Periyar who has argued that there was no God. So, how do you locate that context?
Yeah. So this is one of the very, what shall I say, surprising things about Tamil Nadu is that it has, in terms of proportion, one of the highest percentages of Hindus in the country, right? If I'm not, I mean, I'm not that great with data, but I think Tamil Nadu Hindu population is larger than that of Gujarat, right? But having said that, Tamil Nadu never or very it is really tough for a political party which prioritizes the Hindu identity to gain a foothold in Tamil Nadu. I would say a crucial reason for this is Periyar, but also a pre-Periyarist sort of political legacy which existed in Tamil Nadu, which involved reimagining religion and also the possibilities of rejecting religion, right? So there were thinkers prior to the arrival of Periyar who wanted to imagine egalitarian, casteless forms of Shaivism, right? There were thinkers who wanted to imagine egalitarian, casteless forms of Buddhism, right? And all of these thinkers wanted to propose alternate religions to what they believe was a mainstream Vedic, Brahmanic imagination of Hinduism, which was, according to them, fundamentally centered on social hierarchies. But around the same time, there was another sort of breed of thinkers who emerged who wanted to subject religion in general to radical criticism, right? Not just reformation, but even the rejection of religion. And these thinkers were sort of setting the cultural and intellectual stage prior to the arrival of Periyar. Now, at the time when Periyar arrives, you have these sort of intellectual and cultural currents already existing in society. You also have this powerful non-Brahmin political formation in the name of the Justice Party, which existed. You know, they were not always electorally successful, but they managed to push forward non-Brahminism as a political agenda. In this sort of a non-Brahmin reformist political, social, and cultural climate, Periyar was able to push forth his critique of religion very well. But having said that, what sort of impact did it create on society? Did people immediately become non-believers en masse? No, I don't think that's the case, right? In fact, one could even say that there were many people who were staunch believers, but who would still nevertheless go and attend Periyar's meetings because they had always something to take away from Periyar, right? It could be his statement that Hindi should not be imposed on Tamil Nadu. It should be his struggle for greater state autonomy. It could be his advocacy for greater civil and political rights for women. It could be his advocacy for proportional representation for different castes and communities in the public services. It could be his emphasis on solidarity across different communities. Now, all of these existed along with his criticism of religion. So the people who attended his meetings always had something or the other to take away from the bundle of messages which he was offering. His radical criticism of religion, while it might have potentially hurt, some of the believers in Tamil Nadu, the vast majority did not take it upon themselves to react violently. And not just that, they also believed that this sort of a criticism was coming from a person who had their best interests at heart, right? So this wasn't some person who was just coming there to abuse religion and the gods and so on and so forth. This was a person who was on the streets fighting for reservations, fighting for women's rights, fighting for state autonomy, and so on and so forth. So when he was positing a critique of religion, they were willing to accept it without really subscribing to it, right? So likewise, when we look at the Dravidian parties which branched off from Periyar, whether it be the Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam or the later Anna Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam, which split off from DMK. Now, the vast majority of the followers as well as the people in leadership positions happen to be believers in religion. What they do not do is to politicize religion or to use religion to polarize people for votes or for any other political purposes whatsoever. So, in a sense, you have a situation in Tamil Nadu where believing Hindus in the one of the holiest places for Hindus, namely Rameshwaram, which is in Ramnad district, can vote en masse for a believing Muslim without there being any sort of a contradiction between their personal beliefs and their public political choices, right? So that, I would say, is one of the major impacts created by the Dravidian movement and Periyar.
Right. So what was Periyar's approach to Hinduism, especially with respect to women, intermediate caste, and Dalits? Could you discuss it in reference to Ramayana that you engage with in your work?
Yeah. See, now Periyar was, most known for his acerbic criticisms of Hindu religion and especially the Ramayana. I think this is something about him which till date makes him very uncomfortable for Hindu nationalists as well as people who are, liberal but do not want to challenge religion or Hinduism in particular. Why this is because Periyar's attack on Hinduism and what he believed were inegalitarian beliefs and practices in Hinduism was relentless, right? So he believed that only by rejecting or doing away with Hinduism, that an egalitarian society could be formed. Right? But then let us also remember that Periyar was not the only person doing this, right? In the pan-Indian level, you had Dr. Ambedkar, his book, The Riddles of Hinduism, contains the most detailed and intensive criticisms of Hinduism, which Periyar himself has not produced, right? And in Tamil Nadu, also there existed other Dalit leaders who wanted to totally reject any relationship whatsoever with Hinduism. Likewise, in Maharashtra, you had Mahatma Jyotirao Phule, who also launched attacks on Hindu gods and deities, which in today's context might be considered objectionable or even obscene. So in the wake of all these sort of thinkers, Periyar's criticism of religion is not new nor is it exceptional, right? What made Periyar new is that he made these criticisms public, right? So they were not scholarly attacks. They were not debates in intellectual forums. So this would be usually in front of thousands of people, either in cities or even in temple towns. So you would have, with reference to my previous question, you actually would have Periyar visiting temple towns, addressing thousands of people, most of whom were obviously believing Hindus, and make extensive criticisms of the religion. The reason why he chose Hinduism and especially texts like the Ramayana for attack is that he believed that these sort of texts degraded women, the Shudras, and the other lower caste communities. So, for instance, uh, he would refer to how the incident of Shambhuka, right, which I from what I know is a later interpolation into the Ramayana. But then again, it was part of the public narrative at that point of time. So he would refer to the incident of Shambhuka, wherein the Shudra ascetic is beheaded by Lord Rama because he wanted to learn the Vedas, right? So Periyar takes this as evidence that according to Hinduism, the lower caste and the Shudra communities were not entitled to have an education, right? So he also refers to other incidents in the Ramayana, for instance, the mutilation of Shurpanaga, to show how this potentially enabled violence against women. Now, you could have a legitimate criticism on whether he was reading these texts too literally, right? Maybe he should have read it metaphorically, right? But then let us also consider the time in which he was working, where there were other political leaders in dominant and powerful positions in across India who were using the Ramayana and Hindu iconography to legitimize and justify nationalism, right? To construct an Indian self which was fundamentally rooted in India, while looking at other religions as being not Indian or not being adequately Indian. So this was happening at a pan-Indian and a powerful level. In comparison to that, Periyar's approach to this religion, especially the Ramayana, is linked to political atheism, which, as I told you, is a criticism of political theology. I believe Periyar sensed how Indian nationalism was, in a sense, greatly using religious iconography, especially deriving from the Ramayana, and he believed that it was a task of his breed or his idea of political atheism to criticize these linkages because it would be harmful for women, the Shudras, and the Dalits, right? But more importantly, and critics of Periyar do not recognize this, is that Periyar was not only critical of Ramayana as such, he was critical of other religions as well.
Right. Since you mentioned other religions now, this brings us to our next question. What was his approach to religions like Buddhism or Islam, especially because they were probably more egalitarian in the sense that, caste hierarchy was not there. So if you could refer, I could, answer this.
Yeah. See, I mean, this has to be seen in a sort of a sense of Periyar's phases in his life, as well as the essence of Periyar's works as such, right? Because there are moments in Periyar's life where he seems to be advocating a very strong support for Islam, right? So in the 1920s and 1930s, and in fact, even till in the early 40s, Periyar seems to advocate Islam as the best religion for the Tamils, because he says that Islam is the religion which does not have caste, or which has abolished caste distinctions, right? But then we know now, in the wake of a rich interventions from Pasmanda scholarship, that Islam not only did it not abolish caste, it also very strongly preserved caste in its own way, right? So what was Periyar's take on this, and how can we reconcile Periyar's anti-caste position to this? Firstly, the sort of Islam Periyar was advocating was only as a counter or an opposition to mainstream hierarchical Brahminical Hinduism, right? To just slightly go back to the previous question, Periyar invokes Ravana as a Dravidian icon, not because Periyar believes in the historical presence of Ravana. He only invokes Ravana as a Dravidian icon because he can mobilize him as a counter-cultural icon to Lord Rama, who is seen as a North Indian Aryan icon. Right? So likewise, he is using Islam in certain moments, not because he believes in Islam or its tenets, but only so that he can challenge and confront mainstream Brahminical Hinduism. But having said that, Periyar also at many places points out to the regressive practices in Muslim societies, right? He, for instance, is thoroughly opposed to the restrictions placed on women. And, it will be very interesting to read him in the current context because he was a very strong opponent of the hijab, right? So he very strongly would have stood by the protesters in Iran who are fighting against the Iranian regime. Because, and let us also remember this, when Periyar went on his European travel, he also traveled through Turkey, where he looked at the modernization in Kemalist Turkey, the sort of freedoms which the women had, the right to vote, the right to take part in the political process. And, they were part of the modern national and secular life. And Periyar saw that as a model for Indians to follow, Hindus and Muslims alike, right? So, for a very limited time period, Periyar assumes that such a modernization happened in Turkey because of Islam. But eventually, he comes to the conclusion that for the good part, Islam in South Asia is not willing to, go anywhere in the direction of modernization or providing equality for women. So he starts distancing himself and disassociating himself from Islam. In fact, he also, says that in the wake of the 1965 Indo-Pak war, that he's going to strongly it's 1965, right? I hope I'm not wrong with the date. Yeah, in the 1965 Indo-Pak war, that he is going to support for India because Pakistan is an Islamic state, and he is never going to support a state which is going to forcibly enforce religion on its subject population, right? And with regards to Buddhism, it is interesting because Buddhism, I would argue, is a sort of a religion or an anti-religion according to Periyar. And it is one, perhaps, what shall I say, system of belief which Periyar has minimally criticized, right? So, throughout his career, Periyar maintains that Buddhism has historically been an egalitarian religion. He has maintained, much like Ambedkar, that Buddha's intervention in Indian society aimed to bring about rationalism, enlightenment, and egalitarianism. And Periyar also has himself identified himself as a Buddhist at certain occasions. But there are also other occasions where Periyar says that, especially towards the end of his life, I think in an interview with Anita Dial in 1972, if I'm not wrong with the year, he says that he supported Buddhism, but he doesn't want to advocate for it anymore because it has largely become ritualistic, right? It has become ritualistic and does not have the social intensity for social reform which he wants it to have. So Periyar, again, his support for Buddhism is longer and more consistent than his support for Islam, for instance, right? But having said that, Periyar recognizes that religion has its limits and there's only so much one can do with religion. So at the end of the day, Periyar believed that no religion was better than the best religion.
Right. Now, thank you for that response. Now, we've come to the final question, but also a very important one, which is what is the relevance of Periyar's political atheism in the contemporary times?
Okay. See, as I want as I said in my introduction, the purpose of this book is not so much to have a reflection on Tamil Nadu's politics, but to take Periyar's thoughts to a global audience and to reflect on global issues, which is why my last chapter tries to highlight how we can read Periyar in global debates on secularism, religion, atheism, and post-secularism, right? Very simply, I think that much of the debates on atheism, especially in the West, seem to be completely bereft of any sort of an understanding of the social context, right? So, for instance, many of the well-known atheists in the West, like Dawkins or Sam Harris or Daniel Dennett, seem to launch extensive critiques or criticisms of religion, but very rarely do they take stance on social issues which affect both the majority and minority communities in their home countries, right? So, for instance, let's say someone like Daniel Dennett or Sam Harris would denounce a black community church the same way they would denounce a white Bible Belt Christian fundamentalist church, in the same way they would dismiss an Islamist movement, in the same way they would dismiss the concerns of black Muslims in America, right? So there is no appreciation of social context. There is no appreciation of the politics in which these sort of religions are being used and mobilized. There is just a sort of a blanket condemnation of religion per se without addressing the socio-economic issues which are existent in society. If this is one hand, on the other hand, you have the the very fashionable debate of post-secularism in the academia, which believes that religious mobilization in politics is not only legitimate but also desirable, right? So, which potentially can have very dangerous consequences, because there is no way one can prevent religious mobilization from going in the direction of fundamentalism, right? Now, we do definitely recognize that in the anti-colonial movement, you had figures like Mahatma Gandhi, for instance. You had figures in indigenous communities in India. In Latin America, you had liberation theologians fighting for the rights of the indigenous people, using a very strong Christian message. Now, over here, let us always remember the larger social and political context without necessarily legitimizing the religious discourses which these leaders or these movements have been using, right? Because we should also realize that with, let's say, someone like Gandhi, or with the liberation theologians in Latin America, there is always a scope of the criticism of their narratives. There is always a possibility that the sort of liberation narratives that they are positing with their understanding of theology can be contested and can be challenged, right? So, for instance, when Marxists, Marxist atheists criticize liberation theologians in Brazil, or when Ambedkar is criticized Gandhians in India, the response is not to silence them or to, worse, to enact violence upon them. But there are definitely strands of religious mobilization which have a dominant presence in many countries across the world, which do respond with violence to any and all forms of criticism of what they understand as religion, right? In the current context, post-secularism does not adequately address the potential of these movements to go haywire. And it is only a program like political atheism that can bring a balance between not taking the extreme position of, this blanket condemnation of religion and rejecting any and all forms of religious mobilizations, and the other one of post-secularism, which seems to legitimize any and all forms of religious mobilization. So political atheism, I would say, provides a sort of a global perspective where we can appreciate the possible emancipatory aspects that certain forms of religious mobilizations can have, while also maintaining the freedom to criticize these religious mobilizations and their beliefs and challenge them in order that a more modern and, I use modern in a very positive sense, a more modern and an inclusive society can be built.
Well, thank you so much, Karthik, for taking us through your book. It was an absolute pleasure listening to you, and I'm sure that our listeners and viewers will also take away a lot from the book. So thank you once again for doing this, for doing sociology.
Thank you very much, Rituparna and Deepali. I had a very nice time conversing with you, and thank you for the very brilliantly framed questions. I think I've captured the essence of my book in this interview.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.